Production organizations at larger game studios often suffer from issues of structure, such as a substantial number of producers, senior lead producers, and even lead producers, all rolling directly up into an overburdened production director, because there doesn't seem to be an understood space for a production manager, a producer manager, that sits between frontline production and executive/director level production leadership. What is the rationale for this gap when discipline manager is a well-understood conceit in other game dev disciplines? E.g., designers will have design managers reporting to a design director, artists will have department managers reporting to a director, engineers have managers between them and directors, etc. Is it just that production is typically not a large enough organization to merit managers? Is it that producers are seen as organized and not in need of more traditional personnel management? Okay, so Kevin is describing an organization where, let's say you've got somebody and they're like your production director, and then you have a slew of people where you've got like a lead producer, a senior producer, a mid-level producer, and an associate producer, and they're all just reporting into this one person. And as this scales, as you get more and more of these connected, this person gets more and more overwhelmed and their life gets miserable. So I know that this happens. I don't see this a ton. I see this some. Typically, I do see it in the case he talked about where you actually have a very, very small organization. So it is just something like, I've got a PD and there's only like 4 direct reports or something, and one's a lead producer and 2 are mid-level producers and one's an associate producer, and that's it. And they all just report into the PD. And we don't really feel like we need managers. We don't want to create a bunch of, like, oh, this person actually reports over here and not here. And it just kind of simplifies things to keep it when in a very small organization. In larger organizations, what I tend to see is you'll have someone like a production director, and they will have, in a larger structure, they'll have like again, I'm just going to go with the chain that he created for levels. Just a couple lead producers, let's say, and then they will each have, some number of senior producers, and the senior producers might actually manage all of your mid-level producers and associate producers and assistant producers and whatnot. Like this is sort of the base management layer, and then you kind of go up. And this person might report into the EP, and the EP, reports into the CEO or something like that, right? So I see this quite a bit in larger organizations with more production staff. Now, you're bringing up a good point though, and that is that when I'm thinking about an engineering discipline, what you'll tend to see is there's almost like 3 tracks. Is it 3 tracks? I think it's kind of, someone's going to shoot me for this in engineering, but there's like, if I think about an engineering team, they probably have a tech lead, and they probably also have an engineering manager. The engineering manager might not be part of the team, but all the people are on the team kind of are following the tech lead when it comes to practical stuff, but they're reporting into the EM. And so I've got just like a bunch of engineers, mid and junior and even senior, and their reporting line goes this way. These are a bunch of people in here, but they work with a tech lead, and so you have this distinction of, hey, this person, this tech lead, is a leadership track that might go towards, architect or something like that, or director of engineering, but the EM also can ladder up towards director of engineering, but almost feels like this is somebody who the engineering manager focuses on the people management side of things. And so there's actually this split at every level between, well, who's managing and who's architecting perhaps, or who's like leading the technology. You do not see this as much in production. I think so. I've actually had arguments about this because I had an idea that I thought that there should be this split where every like if you're a producer, you're probably going to start and you're going to be an AP, and then you're going to get promoted to like, a mid-level producer, and then you're going to get promoted to a senior producer, and then things start branching, and you might have a path of, well, I just want to keep becoming a better and better senior producer, and maybe we have senior producer levels, like 2 or whatever, 2 through 5, I don't know, whatever it is. But you're not going up into more senior leadership layers. You're focusing still on teams and that development. And then you might have somebody else who's like, well, I want to actually manage producers. And so now you get a production manager of some kind. And sorry, that looks like product manager. I'm referring to production manager. But you can also go into the production manager space, and then I think and then on the other side you have somebody who goes up and they become a lead producer, and then they become a director, and this was to try to capture the different possibilities that sit around, I think, where people actually have strengths and where they want to develop talent. The reason the people I was talking to didn't want to do that, they felt that, what do producers do already? Well, producers create the culture, they establish the processes, they lead the teams. The skill sets that they use overlap sufficiently with what people managers use that they should be able to do both. So basically, as you're going up the hierarchy in production, you're naturally accepting management responsibility, but that's very similar. Like, managing an individual isn't that different from managing a team. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's less of a Venn diagram overlap there than many people think. I think people management is its own unique and complicated ball of wax. And that is very different, actually, from leading teams. But I get that idea of this. There is more similarity there than it would be for a tech lead to an engineering manager. It is in both our leadership, both our managing and mentoring roles, these sorts of things. So that was the argument I got back, and they just basically said, so we want a dual hat. Basically, once you hit senior, you might start accepting direct reports, and especially once you hit lead and director and VP and all those different things, you're going to be, we expect you to be able to manage people. Again, I can make an argument the other way. I think you also have the other side of this, where it also depends on who you're asking your producers to manage. In some organizations, your producers are managing everybody, and that's quite a load. But in a lot of organizations, the producers only manage other producers, and then they have leadership authority over teams, but not management authority over the devs. And so there's a distinction there. And if that's when you only have the management responsibility of producers, you tend not to have as many producers, to the point that Kevin kind of asked this in there, is it partially because they're not large enough to merit managers? I think that makes sense to me. In a lot of organizations, you're not going to have sufficient managers to want to have a dedicated production manager who's not actually also leading some part of the org from the production lens. This can get more complicated because you can have subdisciplines of production in different places. Like, some have a product-oriented branch and a more operational or development-oriented branch. You can have more than that as well. But yeah. So, did I answer the question? Yeah. I would be interested to see larger organizations actually thinking more about the idea of having a production manager, because to get to this last part of the question, you said, are producers seen as organized and not in need of more traditional personnel management? Maybe. If so, that's incorrect. And one of the big reasons I'll give for this, because there are fewer producers, I've been the only producer in my subdiscipline in very large chunks, like in a 50-person org. I was the only one there who was sort of a development manager. And I was also the only development manager who had real context on what was going on inside of that whole space. So you can be very isolated when you're a producer. And I think even if we say, well, they're more organized, they don't need traditional personnel management. No, they need more mentorship, because artists tend to work with other artists. Engineers tend to be able to interact with other engineers. Designers get to talk to other designers, and there's a shared understanding of usually the problem spaces. It is more common to see producers isolated and operating in completely different systems than the producers around them. So managing them is one way that they get the mentorship and the support that they need to survive while they're the only production voice potentially in a very large group of individuals that are a set of teams or whatever. So I think I think management is really important. The other thing is, my view is that producers are force multipliers. And if they're bad, that means they're dividing your organization. They're making everybody worse. And if they're good, they're making everybody better. They have a huge potential to impact the future of the project. I think it's why some people don't like having production, is because there's just if they're really good, it might be amazing, but man, if they're bad, they can hamstring everything. It doesn't matter how good your devs are. If you've got a terrible producer at the helm of a team, they will torpedo everything that's happening. And so some devs and organizations just like, I don't even want to deal with that. Just like, let's not have producers. And I get it. You're losing out on the potential upside to avoid the downside, in my opinion. But this is where I think like that management role is so important, because they are alone. You need to be training them. You need to be teaching them. You need to be staying in touch with them. And if the other downside of the model, both that you described, where the production director manages everybody, or what I've seen more often, I think, in larger orgs, where everybody kind of reports into some senior layer or lead layer, and then that sort of cascades from lead to director and director to VP and VP to COO. I don't know, however that goes. Yes, it's that in both of those structures, the people in charge, the people managing, may have another thing that's more important than their management responsibility. This is the real advantage to me of having a dedicated art manager or a dedicated engineering manager. This is somebody whose job it is to take care of the people, their tools, the craft, the discipline, not in some abstracted way like taking care of it on the HR side of how do we level and what's everybody's salary, but actually taking care of the people very directly within the discipline. And this can fall through in production. And that, if it does, it exacerbates that problem of the aloneness of the producer in their environment, which can lead to a lot of confusion and difficulty. Again, it's just like, hey, if I'm the production director for an entire game and I have to make I'm bringing together all the roadmaps, and I'm tracking all the reports, and I'm making sure that our tools are working properly, and I'm tracking to make sure we're all aligned and going in the same direction, and I'm scheduling the meetings, and I'm building the work system, and oh, by the way, I'm also managing 7 people. Most individuals do not put the same priority on that people management as they do on the rest of their responsibilities. And partially that's because they're incentivized to do everything else, not the people management. So something that I choose to do when I manage people is focus. I make sure that is on paper and in reality my number one priority. That is my main role that I do, and then my role leading the organization comes in second, and that's to make sure that I'm actually taking care of the long term of the people that report to me, their careers, and generally just the organization as a whole. Because I think if we drop that, if I start giving my management responsibilities lip service, you end up having you become a bad boss, and bad bosses are what ultimately will really it'll create a toxic organization. It'll create an organization that won't succeed over the long term. But it's tough. It's tough because there's so much to do if you're the lead producer running, a set of 7 teams through a whole distributed network of other producers. The idea that you're going to focus a ton of attention on managing those individuals it's not likely to happen without you being very deliberate about it. And you may not be treated well for that prioritization call, even though, in my opinion, it's the right thing to do.